Hey everyone, and welcome to another tutorial by artincontext.org, where we explore various art-related topics. And in today's tutorial we'll be learning how to draw the classic vignette snail. So without further ado, let's get into the drawing process. Now, the vignette snail is comprised mostly of two main sections, which could be described as the shell and the body of the snail. Now, in order to draw these features really well, we first want to establish them in their most fundamental shapes. Once we have established the basic fundamental shapes, we want to work with our eraser to give these shapes a light erasing, allowing us to see some visible lines to assist us as we proceed now into the sketching of the snail drawing. Now, once we have lightly erased these fundamental shapes, we want to start working with our pencils to start refining the two main features of the snail. Now, with the shell could be described as this croissant-like shape. It has these segments that spiral and get smaller and smaller as they move to the back end of the snail, and this sits directly on top of the body of the snail. When it comes to the body of the snail, it has this kind of irregular triangular shape. It is quite sharp at the tail end and quite flat at the bottom of the body, just due to the snail's jelly-like structure, which makes it quite flat as it moves along any surface. But as the body shifts into the head area, the head becomes quite squarish. Now, the head has 4 tentacles, or 2 sets of tentacles. The first 2 are quite long, that stem in a vertical direction directly from the top of the head, and then the 2 smaller tentacles extend from the face area of the snail in a horizontal direction. Once we have established a basic sketch of the snail, we want to start working with our brown pencils and start adding in some details into the body of the snail. So we're going to focus first on the body of the snail, and then once we have completed the body of the snail with both colored details and some shading with our pens, we can then move on to the shell. So with the body, vignette snails have this very specific textural quality, so it's almost like pebbles, and the way in which we will represent this is by drawing almost little pebble shapes, or in this case try to think of it as stacking pebbles, but we won't necessarily be stacking pebbles, we'll be drawing pebbles directly next to each other with our brown pencils. So that's basically what we want to do. But we don't want to do this only with one brown pencil. We want to play around with darker, mid-tone and lighter brown pencils as we proceed to draw in these little pebble-like shapes. As we draw in these pebble-like shapes with our brown pencils, utilizing both the darker brown pencils and the lighter brown pencils, we are establishing a base layer of color that is going to be unique to the vignette snail. The color scheme of the vignette snail is this variation of browns, so this is why we want to use different brown colored pencils. As you draw in these brown pebble-like shapes, really try to play around with adding in different pebble shapes with different colored brown pencils. The idea is that by doing so, we are creating a variety of different tonal values in the body, and this is just going to emphasize the three-dimensional quality of the snail. So we can continue this process moving all the way from the tail end to the head of the snail. But as we approach the head of the snail, we want to make sure that these pebble shapes get a little smaller and smaller, and they can be slightly larger within the body area as well as within the tail area of the snail. So as we continue with this process of adding in brown pencil pebble-like details, try to really make sure that you allow a variation and a mixture of browns to move through the body. So we don't need to keep these pebble shapes uniform, number one, in shape, and we don't need to keep them uniform in color either. We just, most importantly, want to make sure that they get slightly smaller as they come near the head area and a little lighter as they come near the head area. We can also make them slightly darker near the base of the shell, where the shell rests on the body of the snail. And by doing so, we just, again, emphasize a little bit more of a shadowing that the shell would cast on the body of the snail. Now, once we have completed this, we're going to move into adding in some pen details, some shading with our pens. And this, again, is to enhance the three-dimensionality of the snail drawing a little further. Now, we really want to be strategic with how we add in pen details. Again, the idea is to not completely draw over the colors. We really want to make sure that the colored pencil lines or details that we've added into the body still remain prevalent, even though we are going to now add in some shading over these colored pencil details. Try to, as we work with our ballpoint pens, really try to consider how each little pebble shape would be its own little three-dimensional object, almost as if it were stuck onto the snail. So what we want to do is we basically want to use our ballpoint pen to add some dark pen lines and lighter shading in between these pebble shapes. So it's almost as if we're trying to emphasize the grooves in between each pebble shape. And as we proceed with the shading process, we don't necessarily need to do a distinct outline of each pebble. We can add pen lines on perhaps one side of each pebble. And by doing so, if we add darker pen lines on one side of each pebble, it creates a little moment in each pebble of light and shadow. So on one side it'll be slightly lighter, and on another side it'll be slightly more shadowed. However, as you continue with this process, you can, again, as you come towards the base of the shell where it rests on the body of the snail, start to make these shading marks a little darker, just to emphasize that quality of shadowing that the shell would cast on the body of the snail. This process is a little painstaking, but again, just try to take your time. If you feel tired, take a break, come back to the drawing when you feel a bit more refreshed. This way you are less likely to make mistakes, and when adding in details or drawing at all with the pen, it's very likely that we might make a mistake by accident. So really try to take your time. Once you've completed adding in pen details all the way through the head to the tail, we can then move on to the shell of the snail drawing. Okay, so at this point we should have a quite well-drawn snail body with color details, some shading that we have done with our pen, and now we're going to transition into the shell. So we're going to follow the same process where we apply color as a kind of a base layer, and this is just going to again establish a foundation for the shading that we will put in later into the shell. Now with the shell, the vineyard snail is very iconic for these brown streaks that form along the different segments within the shell. However, we really want to make sure that as we draw in these brown streaks, we again utilize a variety of different browns. So feel free to add in lighter brown streaks, darker brown streaks, and like mid-tone brown streaks. But it is really important that we give them slight curvature to emphasize the curving of each segment within the shell. Now this process we can continue in the shell, and obviously the lines will get slightly smaller, but we always want to make sure that we are flowing with the curvature of each segment as we move into the smaller segments. This process of establishing the coloration within the shell, we can again just make sure we take our time, make sure that we're utilizing a variety of different brown colors, making sure that we are emphasizing the curvature within each segment. And again, if you feel tired, make sure you take a break and then come back to the drawing with a more refreshed approach, and make sure that you are, less likely to make mistakes with feeling a little bit more engaged and focused. And then lastly, once we have completed adding some color into the shell, we will then proceed with the last stage with adding in some pen shading just to emphasize the color details in the shell. So we want to kind of use the color pencil lines to guide us as we add in shading. However, we really want to make sure that we don't add in too much dark pen line streaks. We really want to use the pen line streaks more strategically to give more dimension to the curvature within each segment of the shell. So on the edges of each segment, moving from the larger segment to the smaller segment, we just want to add in these pen strokes that flow into the center of each segment and flow along each segment to just enhance the three-dimensionality of the shell's shape. Other than that, this process we can continue until we come to the end point of the smaller segments within the shell, and we should be complete by then. And there you have it, guys. This is the basic process of how to draw the classic vignette snail. I hope this tutorial was informative and helpful. If you liked the video, please subscribe, please like it. That really helps us a lot. And we will see you in the next one. Cool. Cheers, guys.